Welcome in, welcome in. We got a great live for you today.
Hey,
and it's my
everybody.
birthday.
Yay! Happy birthday, Joe.
So as you guys know, so we got Tim Steckel here today, and we're going to talk compost. And that's what he thinks. He thinks about compost 24/7. And what better guy to have on our show than Tim Steckel talking about compost? But first, I'm going to show, when people are coming on in, I'm going to show the 6 inches of soil film that I've been showing every single episode because I absolutely love it. So let's show that quick when people are starting to come on in, and we're going to introduce Tim. Here it is.
6 inches of soil feeds 8 billion people.
We already grow in of all the human essential nutrients to feed everyone who's alive.
Farming is the single biggest cause of biodiversity collapse, the second biggest cause of climate change.
Soil is the most valuable resource on the planet, and we're degrading it without even realizing.
We have come to believe that money is more important than soil. That idea has to change.
Regenerative agriculture is farming that we're producing food, but also farming in harmony with nature.
You're working with nature, not against it.
The more people see it, the more that they realise that it works.
Having a regenerative agroecological system, that is surely the solution.
Soils are absolutely phenomenal in the amount of carbon they can store.
What we absolutely need now is urgent action from the government.
Until you deal with 9 retailers who have 94.5% of food sales in Britain, you're not going to have a level playing field.
Consumers have a choice. They can decide to buy cheap meat from industrial farms, or they can find farmers that really value animal welfare and the environment that we're farming in.
Dad started regen farming for the future generations to come, and that was the most selfless act he could have done.
The people who are doing this are making big sacrifices.
I think the potential is absolutely huge here.
These farms really can change the world.
It's all about the soil, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that's 6 inches of soil. And as we've been talking about for the last 2 or 3 months, everything starts with the soil. And that's the reason why we're bringing in compost. Because we gotta bring in all those fungi.
We got to post that link in the show notes, right? That's great. Yeah. I didn't know about that. That's awesome.
And there's also another movie out, The Need to Grow. And I'm going to show that after the interview today, which is pretty outstanding. So before Tim comes on, I'm going to go to talk about, like, who is Tim? Where did he come from? So I'm just going to show, this is from the Lincoln page. I love compost. It is quintessential example of circle of life. Every day that even better than Disney's The Lion King, it is possible to fall in love with compost. Well, I think it is. I got to put my glasses on, guys. And I don't know where they're at. I want composting to be the default option for residential, commercial, and farming organic waste streams. They will divert resources from being wasted. I want to lower the average organic trash in residential collections. I believe we can accelerate composting by supporting the composting industry. The odds are stacked against us and all other industries ahead. While I am marketing compost, I am actually facilitating a pattern change. Changing the patterns of fertilizing lawns and chemicals, changing the patterns of farming practices that lead to soil erosion and compacted soil. And if you want to, over here, try out 5 free compost content pieces, and you can look at it at compostmarketing.com, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And so that's a little bit of information right there. So we're going to bring on Tim right now. Welcome in, Tim Steckel. How you doing?
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. And yeah, excited to be with you guys.
So tell us about your journey. Did you when you were growing up? Did your parents have a farm? Did you what?
Yeah.
Where did you
No,
live in
not
a
at all.
city?
No. So I think my background growing up with compost is really I'm from Germany, and um, in my hometown, in my municipality, we had a organic waste collection since I was about 6 or 7 years old. So I kind of still vaguely remember when they introduced the green bin, and then I never, had a second thought about it, and I just took it for granted. It was just, well, here's the green bin for the organic waste. And about 8 years or so ago, I moved to the United States, and here in Cleveland Heights, we were still putting just bags on the curb, recycling and trash, and no organics collection. So that was really kind of the first time that I realized, well, you can't really take it for granted. It was something special, or at least something that is still not the case here. We still don't have a municipal organic waste collection here. We have a fantastic private service called Rust Belt Riders, and they've been offering a compost collection since 2014 here. But yeah, that was kind of the first thing where I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? And then I was in similar shoes, I would say, as you were, as just a gardener. And you mentioned it, everything starts in the soil. So if you're getting into gardening, then you realize, okay, it starts in the soil. How am I going to make soil or improve my soil? And that how 1 and 2 kind of came together. I had organic waste. I wanted to garden. You make compost. That's how everything comes together. And then I think it just got further and further down the rabbit hole. I built my own first hot compost pile, and by that time I'd never really experienced it, but like just the heat, when you open up that pile, and it's 140 or 150 Fahrenheit in that pile, you can feel it. And then everything changes over the course of 2-3 weeks. The stuff that you put in the pile just completely transforms and becomes something different, becomes compost, or what could be soil. And yeah, that's really how I got into composting, and then it just it just went from there.
Now, what do you put in your compost pile?
Well, I mean, I pretty much go by everything that's been once alive can be composted. So that's pretty much how I simplify it. So I have like a integrated system now. It's like not just a compost pile. I have a couple chickens in the backyard too. So that's how I got further and further down that rabbit hole. I thought, well, if I have food scraps, then I can feed my chickens with them, and then I don't need to buy as much chicken feed, and it's kind of natural, it works. And then they poop, and then I can compost the poop, and it's like it went all from there. And I do what's called a deep litter system in my chicken coop. So it's essentially, there's some chicken keepers that will essentially like clean their coop once a week, and they have like something below the roost where they kind of try to trap all the droppings, and they need to deal with it constantly. And I'm the opposite. I like clean my coop like once or twice a year, because I just keep adding carbon on top of it. So at some point I had like a 2 feet deep litter system in that coop, where I'm just essentially adding more leaves and wood chips, and leaves and wood chips, and it takes care of the odor, and it's a great way to essentially kind of start to compost. in place a little bit. It's not necessarily a compost pile, but it's a good way to collect the droppings. And then I guess the next thing that happened was a neighbor said that they were moving and they have like a worm bin, and by that time I was already, primed on compost. And I was like, I'm going to take those. And well, I got the worms and then I essentially integrated the worms with my chickens. So I made a big worm bin in the area where the chickens are in the chicken run. And the way it works is like everything that comes from my kitchen essentially ends up in the worm bin, and the chickens can jump on top and eat everything from the top, kind of shred and scratch a little bit through it, and the worms come from below and take everything else that the chickens don't want. And this way I have like an integrated kind of system, and pretty much everything but chicken out of my kitchen goes that way, So like I don't want to like feed my chickens chicken. That's kind of the reasoning behind that. But I kind of like took it further, right? Like I wanted to make more soil, going back to being a gardener. And so I put a post, on our neighbor board and said, hey, you've got more food scraps, I'll leave empty buckets in my driveway and you can swap it out. And ever since, probably for 6 or more years, I've been having those empty buckets in my driveway, and neighbors will come and essentially switch a bucket, a full bucket for an empty bucket. And this way I just want to make more. I mean, if you really look into how much good soil costs, right? If you're a gardener and you have all these resources, then that's really the best way to make soil right in your garden, right? It's like you don't have to truck it anywhere. It's right there. You know what's in there. I mean, sometimes if you buy cheaper topsoil, you find like glass and other things inside. And I mean, maybe during this conversation, we'll get into contamination and all these other things too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's kind of how things are going over here.
Did you do you tell your neighbors? Do you say, okay, this is what's acceptable to put in the bucket, or is it? Do you find like, are they pretty respectful of that? Just only putting in what you're telling them to?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I have like a little bit of a pamphlet, that's kind of like by my drop-off station, and it says what they can put in, and then some I've known for years now, so they're kind of trained on what goes and what doesn't. And obviously I've also dealt with removing some stickers here, or a rubber band, or plastic bags, and then I'll just kind of like talk to them and re-educate them, I guess. But it's a constant struggle. I mean, especially here in the United States, there's still a lot more education around composting that needs to be done. But going back to Germany, where they have that municipal collection now for 30 years, there's still, on average, a contamination rate of about 10%. So after 30 years, it's still that people put things in there that don't belong. And it's, it's convenience. It's just not caring or not knowing. It's a mix, but that's the reality.
What are the most common contaminants that go in there? What do you find?
Well, I guess in my backyard compost operation, it's probably produce stickers. Those are, it's very easy to overlook them. But for the big composters, the municipal composters, or these private residential services, it's often could be packaging material. And then there's also, now there's a lot more like compostable products that come out, or compostable packaging. And there's still some confusion around it. You know, what's biodegradable, what's compostable, what is there like a certification on it or not? And it's like, I don't shred my material, but like if you're looking at like a commercial operation, right? A lot of the material that comes in actually is being shredded as it comes in to kind of like make a uniform sized material that will compost well. And imagine you have like one plastic bag in there that runs through a shredder, then you're ending up with like 1,000 little pieces of plastic bag, right? So, and it's like very hard to get out of this again. And yeah, there's then on the end, there's also like something where the finished product is sifted again and screened, and it's 99.96% that gets removed, you know, but it's that little bit of leftover that stays in there. And yeah, it's always fascinating and sad, but it's the reality. So, you know, I do a lot of microscoping too, with assessing the compost under the microscope. And even, you know, in my personal compost, where I really try to keep everything, you know, contaminant free, I'll regularly find microplastics under the microscope. And it's like, we all know those like blue rain barrels, right? You might have one in your garden. If you drag that rain barrel across your yard once, you know, a little bit scrapes off, and then you'll find little blue fragments in your compost, right? Or other things that might get into it. And yeah, it's very, very hard to keep it absolutely clean. It's almost impossible, but that's what I'm shooting for.
So trying to get it, reduce it down to as little as you can, really is the goal. Doing the best you can.
Yes. Yeah, and essentially trying to keep it clean from the start. You know, that's really, it's better to start at the beginning than at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of times when we talk about compost, you're just getting into composting, and this was just an experience that I had, which is one of the reasons that I want to compost. But then I think some people make it really complex, and then you can spend a lot of money on these composting bins that I have scraps for days in my house, and I would fill up that bin in about, 25 minutes. So what's the easiest way for people to get started doing this? Because it seems like it should be just that simple, taking your scraps, composting them. And like you said, that then I was composting, but then I saw, well, if you don't, shred your compost, then it does something else. And I was like, oh, okay. So then it becomes this daunting, I'm not doing it right. Should I even do it? So, how do you, did you find that when you started, and, how did that evolve for you? And it sounds like it's a well-tuned machine for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I started, I'm like a healthy, young kind of person, that is able to swing a pitchfork, so I feel like if you're an older couple, then you might not be up for like turning your compost pile every 2 or 3 days to make a hot compost, which is a hot compost is the fastest way to produce a good compost. The heat kills off certain pathogens and weed seeds, and it's definitely making a hot compost pile is also the most complicated way, or the most laborious, so I wouldn't recommend necessarily starting a compost with a hot compost pile, unless you're really let's say you're like serious with gardening and you need to like get like 2,000 square foot of beds amended or something, then you might want to like make a hot compost pile. But essentially, kind of to your point of it being complicated, okay? Like I said, everything that's been once alive can be composted. It's that simple, okay? Everything else that you read really comes down to if you do it, it might create odors, attract rodents, or, you know, like something where, like if you add a lot of cheese or meat or something like this, obviously it might attract wildlife to your pile, you know, it's kind of simple. Or then some people like say, don't use citrus fruit. You know, it's like, obviously you can also compost citrus fruit. It's just that the peels have like oils in them and certain compounds that need to just be balanced. Okay, with composting, everything is about balance. If you just like overdo one thing, then the balance is out of whack, and then you might have problems with like odor or something like this. So essentially, any rule that you like read that kind of like goes against, has it been alive? You know, yes, it can be composted. If it goes against that rule, it really comes down to, it could create odors or attract a nuisance. So, but that doesn't mean you can't compost it. It just means that like when you're getting into composting, then it might create problems for you. And the funny, ironic thing about this is like these people putting out these rules or like recommendations, they kind of want to make it easier on those on beginners and say, well, I don't want to, you know, I don't want it to smell, or I don't want to attract these things. But then, and I have heard so many people like you say, it's so confusing. Like, what can I actually compost? You know, because there's like all these weird rules about it. But like really, it comes down to balance. It's like the same thing like with worms, right? I read so many things about like worms can't eat onions, or worms can't eat that. The thing is really the worms barely eat anything. It's the microbes that they eat, and the microbes break down whatever you put inside of it. So if you add a lot of citrus fruit, for example, then the pH level could be affected, and that affects the microbes, which can affect your worms. But it's not like that the worms can't eat it. It's a misunderstanding, really. So to keep it simple, and to kind of go back to your point, I personally think vermicomposting is one of the easiest ways to compost at home and to get a high quality product. And it's because it's essentially, you can do a hot compost pile, which for beginners is very laborious. And a hot compost pile is also best done in a batch. So you collect your materials and you make a batch and you take care of it for like 2 to 3 weeks, you know, like really aerating it, and then you rest it. Okay. So with vermicomposting, you can continuously feed. It's like you feed from the top ideally, and you harvest from the bottom with a migratory bin, and the worms accelerate everything. Because the third option is really to just put everything in one pile and just give it time. You know, if you put something in a pile and you leave it there for a year, the microbes will just take care of it. It's like, it just takes more time. So it's essentially these three things: a hot compost pile in a batch, vermicomposting, or like the cold pile that, you know, that is just like everything in a pile, and then once a year you kind of sift it out and you'll also get compost out of it. Yeah.
Do you do a combination of those, or do you have one in particular that you mostly gravitate towards?
Well, I personally do, like I said, I have my chickens. So every fall I stock up on carbon. When my neighbors, you know, they're like really nice, they bring all their leaves, they rake them together to the curb. There's like piles and piles of carbon. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. So I grab my tarp, you know, and then now we're going back to, you know, contamination. If you use a tarp in your garden, it'll shed some of that tarp into your garden. It's what happens, you know. It's convenient, it works very well, but like if you drag it, you will be able to find a little bit of tarp under the microscope in, you know, in a few months. So, but essentially I use the tarp and grab all these leaves, and the chicken coop gets like piled up like under the roof. I put it like there's like leaves for a month, you know. And then during the course of the winter, I just keep pushing it into the coop. I have wood chips in there as well. And then come spring, I essentially take all that stuff and make a hot compost pile with it. So the thing is, compost needs essentially 5 things. Okay, compost needs carbon material, nitrogen material. It needs water, oxygen, and then the microbes. Okay, so the microbes are pretty much in the environment. If you have any organic material, they're going to be there. My chicken coop has a roof. Okay, so there's like no extra added water or moisture in that material going on for months. So the process is kind of stalled. I like to say water is the grease of the composting engine. You know, imagine a motor without oil. It won't go far. You know, your car is gonna start smoking and it's gonna go anywhere. So because it's so dry in my chicken coop, the composting process is really kind of, it's more of a collection. And then when kind of like spring comes, February, March, I'll get all that stuff together and make a hot compost pile with that. By adding water, you know, I'll just get it from the floor, make it into a pile, add water, and then a couple of days later, 3 days later, temperature goes up, and I essentially go put that through a hot composting process. And you know, if you have chickens out there, the way I do it, essentially I use pallets. If you're using pallets, look for the one that say HT, that's heat treated. So those aren't the ones that would like leach any sort of like chemicals into your garden. So look for the ones with the HT. And what I do is essentially I put, you know, I put them like kind of like a bunk on the one side, and I fill it up, and then I just remove that one part and move it right over to the other side. And so I can just shovel the whole thing essentially like from one bunk to the other. And that's how I aerate it, you know, every three-ish days for 2 to 3 weeks. And then that compost is pretty much finished. But then I add worms to it, and I just like, you know, kind of break it down further. So that's one of my composts that I do once a year. But then I permanently have that worm bin going on where, yeah, I add food scraps pretty much, you know, yeah, when the bucket is full. So the way I have it is like in our kitchen, you know, we have one of these like nice windows that go up and down like this, you know, and I built something, I call it the compost sill. It's essentially just a board that I cut a hole in, and it fits a bucket. So this way I can collect kitchen scraps, but not in my kitchen. It's outside, but it's right there. So the kitchen window opens up. Here's the bucket. Put it in there, close the window, and my wife is happy because it's not in the kitchen. You know, we won't get fruit flies or something like this. And then I can just like walk by from the outside, pick up the bucket, and bring it up to the chicken coop, you know, and put it in the worm bin.
That's great.
With your compost, how often do you keep it like you can't just leave it dry? I mean, I know there's a lot of moisture. Do you put any water on top it once in a while and make sure it stays?
So for the worm bin, I don't really have to add much water because the moisture gets in there through the food scraps, and then there's also a little bit of rain that might get into it. Mm-hmm. If you have finished compost, then yes, you want to keep it moist because microbes essentially they need water to live, and they also need water to move. Like if you think about like 2 slides under a microscope, it's almost a little bit like a swimming pool for them. That's how I like to kind of think about it. Although for us, it looks just flat, 2 pieces of glass, and there's like barely any space between it. But then once you look, you know, with the lens and everything, you go up and down, the three-dimensionality, or, you know, comes really out of it. So it's like as if I were to like dive into a swimming pool, and that those microbes need the moisture to get around. The thing is, a lot of microbes can actually go into a state that protects them from that dry state. So they can make a cyst or a test and go into some sort of like dormancy. So if your compost dries out, it's not the end of the world. But before you apply it, you should really reintroduce moisture for a few days. And it's actually interesting, if you've ever noticed this, dry soil actually becomes hydrophobic. Have you seen this? Like when the soil is really dry and you water it and it just kind of runs away. So that's like moist soil absorbs water better than dry soil. So yeah, you want to keep it moist. You don't want to overwater it. As gardeners, we're looking for an aerobic product, something that has oxygen in it. So if you add too much water and it becomes waterlogged, then it's going to be depleted of oxygen. It's going to turn anaerobic. And the anaerobic bacteria or anaerobic microbes are usually the ones that are not good for our plants.
Now, do you give some of that soil, some of that compost to your neighbors, since they're giving you some of the scraps?
Yes, a little bit. For the most part, it's been going in my garden, and I have a very dear friend around here, and she used to be a farmer. Now she works in a nursery, and if I share, usually she gets all my good compost because I'll get produce back from her, and it's a win-win. At one point, we actually tried to build like some sort of community garden around here, and it didn't really work out. It's really tough to work around regulations in an urban environment to build a larger garden, and yeah.
Now, do you get your soil tested or your compost tested to see what you actually have in there, or you just look under a microscope?
Yeah, so I have been sending it in, but essentially for the most part, I'm interested in the microbiology. That's how I test my soil. Like most of the standard or classical soil tests are, they're looking for the NPK value. Mm-hmm. They might be looking for minerals. We had some soil tested from that urban lot. We actually looked for heavy metals, and it was more to make sure it's not contaminated in that way. Yeah. Yeah, but for the most part, I'm doing the soil testing myself.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm taking Matt Powers' class. I don't know if you ever heard of Matt, but Matt's amazing.
I've actually, I work with some folks out of California with Catalyst Bioamendments, and they are also kind of working together. The world is still relatively small in terms of making microbial driven compost or with a focus on microbiology, really. So yeah, I've sent messages with him before, and there's an ad in his latest book. I don't know if you had that book. We produced an ad with the Compost marketing agency. Yeah. If you go through that, you'll find the ad that I did for Catalyst Bioamendments in there. So, and if anybody out there is like looking for a really super high quality compost to inoculate maybe even their own compost pile, then yeah, check out Catalyst Bioamendments. They sell bag compost, and you could get. So this compost is not meant to be like a bulk product where you want to necessarily increase your organic matter in your soil. This is to inoculate and make microbial extracts. So essentially what you can do is you can use a really good compost and submerge it in water in a mesh bag, and you extract the microbes out of it, and then you can distribute those microbes by spraying them, or just like putting them in your water and watering your plants with it.
See, guys, the reason why you want to use compost too is because sustainability. You want to sustain your plants. You don't want them to dry out. You want the microbes to go into your roots. so everything works. It helps with plant disease and everything like that. Helps a healthier plant. When you don't have any compost and you have a lack of microbes in your soil, the plant doesn't work as well.
Well, and we talked about this too with regards to human health, is that we are trillions of bacteria, and it's whether it's our human health or the health of our soil, that we have to be able to cultivate all the good bacteria. It doesn't mean the bad stuff isn't going to be there, but how do we manage it so that the bad stuff doesn't take over the good stuff, and just continually make sure that we're nurturing the good stuff?
Yes, and that's actually an interesting thing, that what you just mentioned. I think there's so much similarity between the human microbiome and the soil microbiome, and then there's also so much similarity of what's kind of been going in the wrong direction over the last like 50, 70 years in humans and in the soil, and it's just interlinked, because we are what we eat. And the way we've been farming and treating our soils and the type of food that we're producing with it really affects how we feel in the gut. I mean, autoimmune diseases that are linked to problems in the gut, and then plant diseases that are essentially stem from an imbalance of it's so similar. I mean, we've been relying a lot on just like, modern medicine, which has a lot of advantages, and it has helped a lot of people to like live longer and do it has a lot of benefits, but it also has downsides. And it's the same with how we fertilize and essentially give medicine to our plants. And by now, a lot of the farming is really, the soil has become dependent on, farmers are almost like nurses, rather than farmers. They're like caretakers, because their patient would die without them.
Yeah, right now we have so much glyphosate poisoning. I do a lot of functional medicine testing, and I see glyphosate poisoning, Roundup, for anybody out there, in my patients. And so this is coming not just from the foods that people are eating, because it doesn't die in the soil, it stays in there. And so then people are eating the food from the soil, but then it's airborne. So we're destroying our own gut microbiome. And then, there's stories about people moving into a new house and wanting to plant a garden, and they can't grow a thing. And then little did they know, the person before them, all they did was spray Roundup all over the yard, and they can't grow anything. So I would love to know, in cases like that, when there is, I know when I have to take a really sick person who has completely altered microbiome with a lot of autoimmune issues and bring them from super poor health to, really a much better level of health and vitality, it's a long journey. It's a process. So how would you do that for somebody who maybe has moved into a piece of property and wants to start composting and bring the health of the soil back? Do you see how long would that typically take, and what needs to really be done to bring that health of that soil back?
Yeah, I guess it's similar to what we can do with humans, where we change the diet, or maybe go on a cleanse or a detox or something. For the most part, the potential is still there. So it depends on what has been done to the soil. But for the most part, a lot of the microbes are just dormant. It's like you have to kind of just activate them. And as I just mentioned, compost extract. Compost extract is essentially the form or the best way to reintroduce good microbiology to the soil. So I would definitely recommend to get a very, very high quality compost from someone that takes care of the microbes, or that like makes compost with the microbes in mind, where there's a complete set of the soil food web, so that we have bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, microarthropods in that compost. And then by essentially applying that extract, you'll reintroduce it, and then it's a matter of maybe you might want to add some mulch to protect it. I mean, it depends. Are we talking about like barren soil that's like completely brown and crusty? Are we talking about a soil where there is like just weeds growing? It depends a little bit on the context. It depends a little bit on the climate that we're in, but it can essentially, it comes down to, essentially nurturing them a little bit with those microbes. And then maybe I'd grow in some sort of cover crop for like a intermediate thing, so that you produce some biomass there. You can just like mow down or chop and drop and put back on the soil. And then it takes some time. Like you said, it'll probably take, maybe one growing season. I would, if you really do. And then it's the other things like compost extract will essentially reintroduce the microbiology. Maybe you also want to add some bulk compost to increase the organic matter. That's to have like more actual material that's there and not just the microbes. But that's what I would do.
How like, would you use compost tea extract every couple weeks to add to your planting, to your row? How often would you? Just once, nothing, end of season, middle of season?
Well, I mean, it depends. It's like, do you have a microscope available and can like assess what's there, and then like check after 2 weeks and see what has changed, for example. It's really, I guess you recognize a healthy soil. It's like if you can like take your hand and go and get in and you're not getting stuck and it's loose and it's like it's like, I don't know, Paula, like how you recognize a sick person or something, but there's like certain like signals that you just like, oh, like something's not right, or that. So it's similar. So in terms of the frequency, if you have a healthy soil, or like, let's say you have been gardening your soil for years and it's really, it's fine, it's working for you, then I would essentially do something in the spring and then maybe a foliar or something application throughout the season. And then you want to like do something before the fall to essentially give it something to go into winter and have some, some extra food. Also think about microbes in the soil. They want to eat something. They want to be fed. So if you, like a lot of gardeners, they like to like have kind of like a neat kind of plot, where it's like a plant here and a plant there and a plant there and here. And in between, it's just kind of just the soil, but that is essentially also barren soil. It's not protected from the sun, so think about either adding some sort of like ground cover in between, adding a mulch, and keeping that soil covered. It'll prevent it from drying out as much. And by adding that stuff on top, you're adding food. It's like, you'll see, like if you mulch, where does all that mulch go after a couple months? Like if you just like chop leaves, like not wood chips, but like something that's relatively thin, where is it, right? It has been eaten by the soil. It's been absorbed. So feed the microbes, It's like if you are, like leave. I don't like a lot of gardeners when the season's over, they go through their garden and rip everything out to like clean up the garden for the winter or whatever, like I clean up my garden in spring before I do the next planting. I leave everything in the ground, all these roots in there. There's still, that's what the microbes need to survive and thrive. So, yeah.
No, I always cleaned it out. So I was looking at it as more of the insects or aphids or anything else. Get those bad guys out of there. Like vine borers dig yourself into the ground. Like, so any idea with vine borers then that go into the soil? Would they just not come up if you have a really healthy soil?
No, they will come back up. I mean, it's like it also depends, but like I've been like planting sunflowers, and I've been having like something that came up that stalk, it was like the next year it came back. But the thing is, when I was still ripping it out, it was still coming back the next year, and that's kind of like, I think it's kind of similar to a lot of gardeners. They like to use like weed barriers, because they think weeds come from below, but weeds come from above. It's like the seeds are getting blown in. So to me, like using a weed barrier is almost like creating a landfill. It's because it's like it works for like the first or so seasons, and then there's going to be weeds because they come from the top, not just from the bottom. So like, yeah, a weed barrier protects you from stuff coming from below, but yeah.
And it's a pain in the butt to rip up and get rid of.
Yeah.
I think I'm still pulling up weed fabric from 20 years ago out in my garden. Every time I get to a new spot and I'm like, God, I thought I got rid of it.
Yes, I moved in this house about 8 years ago, and last summer, in the front yard, I'd never dug that deep, and I realized they had put a plastic sheet. It was like that deep. I never knew, and I was like, oh, that's why the soil is so weird here, because there was a thick. So I started ripping it out. It was kind of, yeah, it felt crazy. Like I said, it felt like a landfill to me. But kind of going back to those borers, I guess that is something, like, you can't fix everything with compost, right? I mean, the garden is like a whole ecosystem. It starts in the soil, but also maybe there's like other beneficial insects. You essentially have to find out what likes to eat those vine borers. Like, is it birds, or is it like some other insects? Can you, maybe build something that attracts the natural predators of that vine borer?
It's interesting what happens. It's like a all-out war. It's a Royal Rumble in there. You have your good guys, you have your bad guys, then you have the people that are just pooping out over the place. It's like, man, this is
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And it goes from the larger scale to the very small scale. Today, someone came by to pick up worms. I essentially sell compost worms here to people locally. Okay. And I showed him a little clip that I took with my microscope, and it was essentially a bacterial feeding nematode that was dead, and it was swarmed by bacteria, and the bacteria were actually now eating that nematode. And next to it there was like an amoeba, and it was kind of attracted by all these bacteria, and so fascinating. It is really a little bit of like everybody eats something, and something gets eaten and gets pooped out, but this metabolizing process is really what drives the fertility in the soil. That's what makes the nutrients available to the plant roots. That's how it works. That's kind of like the reason why compost is so good for your plants, because you get all these metabolites.
Now, everything starts with our kids, right? But how do we get compost mainstream? It's like one of your biggest topics, right? Compost mainstream in society. How do we get kids? I mean, it's starting. I see they're learning about compost, they're learning about gardening, which is great. But how do we get it more mainstream?
Well, I mean, if you start with kids, it's definitely, you need to wait a couple decades, like until they're like older. So, but it's good to keep the next generation. We need to continue with that. And I think it's right now it's there's a shift happening where a lot of people kind of like look back to what their grandparents used to do, and kind of like try not to forget all that wisdom, or where there is a lot of like indigenous wisdom, where that has been passed on for hundreds and thousands of years, and it has almost been lost, but now it's coming back into the thing. I mean, I do workshops with kids, and I always bring the microscope. That's like, to me, for kids, is fascinating. What is a microscope in and of itself? I'll have a little penny, and I'll show them, look at this penny. I'll put it under here, and now look how it like magnifies it 40 times, and then just to kind of like get this connection between, here's the penny, this is what it looks like looking at it, and then I put it on the slide. How does it change? And then I'll tell them, hey, here, we're going to take a little bit of this compost. We're going to put it in water, and then I take 2 drops, okay? Put it on the slide, and now let's see what we can find. And I always say the microscope is like a ticket to the zoo that never expires, okay? Like, if you have a zoo membership, then, like once a year you have to renew it or something like that. And everybody kind of knows what an elephant is, right? It's like, if you walk in the zoo, there's an elephant, everybody's like, oh my God, an elephant, And with microscoping, there's certain things, once you've seen them once, you're going to be like, oh, that's kind of my new elephant. It's like, to me, I mean, when I started doing all that stuff, I was kind of clueless. I had seen photos, I read a lot of things, but to actually being able to, I mean, I've been like microscoping for 3.5 years now, and I still find new things all the time. And it's like, oh my God, I have seen this before, like with someone else on Instagram or in a book or something like this, and now it's here, And then I feel like I'm seeing a lion for the first time, or I'm seeing something else. And for children, there is just that natural curiosity. And I feel like if you can show them, look, this is why this banana peel now looks yellow, and in 2-3 weeks, there is no banana peel. Where is it? Like, what happened to it? Because all these little things actually, got to it and ate it and pooped it and got eaten, and I feel like that's a good thing. And then specifically for compost, well, I should probably say there's really 2 avenues on how to look at composting. And you're a gardener, so your primary focus, or like looking at compost, is through soil fertility, okay? We can use compost as soil fertility. However, in the grand scheme of making compost mainstream, there's a lot of people that actually look at composting as waste management, okay? And that's actually where the two can also like collide, and that's like where we have contamination or like these things, like if we just look at composting from the waste management angle, then then it's really just about kind of like reducing that waste and getting rid of it, and possibly as cheap as possible, and that's, sometimes it doesn't work with the soil fertility, because municipal compost sometimes it's just essentially cooked too hot, and if you like cook your chicken too hot, it'll come out dry, and it's not going to be a nice dinner, and that's kind of similar for compost. So in terms of making compost mainstream, soil fertility is the one thing, but then again, we need programs in schools where kids are just actually learning how to separate compost or compostable things from things that aren't compostable. So there's programs where they do that in schools, where I have heard like the word bin monitor a couple of weeks ago. So there's like kids that actually will stand next to the bins. They have like special training, and then they help the other kids to not, they're like, what can go in and what can't. And then essentially then closing the loop. Like every school should also then have a garden, and they should realize, if I'm going to put my plastic thing in this compost, it'll end up in my garden. And once that connection is made and you've touched it and you've worked with it, then I feel like there's going to be a learning experience that will just make a lasting impression.
Now, did you ever look? Okay, get Paula.
I was just gonna. I loved how you're talking about the microscope and getting the kids involved, because I always think, our legacy as kids in making sure that they are living as healthy a life as possible. And as a kid, I remember when it seemed like all my friends, the biggest Christmas gift one year was a microscope. Like we all had to have a microscope as a kid. So, and I don't know that I see a lot now that, you said that, I'm like, I don't really know that I'm seeing a lot of that. But, back in the 70s, everybody had to have a microscope. And then, so you have my wheels turning now, thinking, wouldn't it be cool to rebirth the microscope with like a composting kit or something, and, start to get this more into homes. And I'm imagining when your kids' friends come over, they're probably like, come on, look at the microscope. Do they, I'm assuming you get your kids involved, and they like, they can identify things at this point. Do they show their friends?
Yeah, it's definitely always an excitement. I mean, my kids are also, they also grow up in this day and age, so they also like to watch TV, obviously, but so essentially I have an adapter for my phone so I can put it on the microscope, so we can kind of see it on the screen, and I can attach this to like a computer screen. So it is a little bit like a TV, but it's not as like, you don't have to, like in the 70s. I had a microscope growing up as a kid, but I never really used it in that capacity. I wish I did, but I mean, I guess like microscopes are cheaper than ever. Like you can go to Amazon and get a cheap microscope but on the other hand, there's also a lot of used microscope out there. And I mean, if like a microscope has been taken care of and there aren't like any scratches on the lens or something like this, then it probably just needs a good cleaning, a good like getting the dust out, and you could probably score a good quality microscope from like just the used microscope too. And yeah, I guess the thing really with the kids is the parents also need to be on board, because a microscope is something handling the slides, preparing the slides. It's not something that kids are just able to do by themselves. We have to be realistic about that. It's something where they need someone to guide them a little bit. And so the parents also need to have some sort of curiosity and sense of wonder, and then it'll work. But it's like, you can't just expect like, oh, I'm going to get a microscope and then I'm just going to leave my kids with it. That's not going to work. They're going to probably just be frustrated. And so yeah, I guess schools, we need it in the classroom. We need biology classes, and yeah, I like, it goes back to like the education. It's like, if you do compost education or organics recycling education in your school, it touches on, it's like, it becomes like a whole science project. It could be like so much more than just dealing with waste. It could be so much more than just biology. It could be so much more than gardening. It all integrates. And it's kind of like, you read my statement, before the show started, and that's like what I said. It's like, I think composting is even more a better example than Disney's Lion King for the circle of life. It's like, that's kind of like what they try to show there with their story. And that's all in composting. It's like you could even go into that things die, that people die, that animals die, that plants die, that there are seasons in life, that there is a beginning and an end, but that the end is also the beginning of something new. And I feel like that's why I love composting, because like you could like give me pretty much any sort of like cue, and I could like get a connection to compost from some angle really easy.
Now, how big is your garden?
Small. I live in in an urban environment, is what they call it. And my front yard has two big trees in it. And I've been like actually thinking about cutting them down. And then I was like, well, but these nice trees, but it's like without light, it's pretty hard to do a garden in a sense of like, I like to do a vegetable garden. I like to grow kind of like functional plants, herbs, or like medicinal plants, or something that sustains me. I'm not like an ornamental gardener, where it's like everything needs to be pretty. I wanna have wildlife, or like stuff that create kind of like a refuge for insects and all that stuff. So it's relatively small. Yeah.
And do you have like, would you put tomatoes, peppers, lettuce? Just saying your traditional stuff.
Yeah, I mean, now we actually we just passed that sweet spot, but kind of like going into gardening and composting. Have you heard about hugelkultur before?
Mm-hmm.
You have? Yeah. So that's essentially what I did in my garden one winter, and that's why I said we passed the sweet spot. So next January, okay, when all your neighbors are throwing out their Christmas trees, okay, you can go and collect these Christmas trees. So one year I went around and I put them on the roof of my Subaru and brought them back here. I had about 20 trees. The nice thing, each tree is like relatively light. You can handle it and maneuver it. So what I did is like I made kind of like a berm with those Christmas trees, filled it in with wood chips and all that good bedding from my chicken coop, and some horse manure and some compost on top, and essentially made a hugelkultur bed. And that's like the thing, like making the 3-dimensional space, you'll increase your growing area by like 2.5 or something. Like if you just have a flat surface, you can only grow so much. But if you make it like this, you create a sun side, you create a top and a little bit of like a shade side, so you can grow more. That's kind of like how I try to increase my gardening space here by going 3-dimensional.
How long did that take to, by the time you built it, how long did it take before it was ready for planting?
I grew in that same season. So I essentially built it in January. I got all these trees together, and then I was essentially composting in place, okay, by adding these wood chips and adding the chicken coop bedding and the horse manure. I was creating a little bit of like a compost pile right then and there, and then because I topped it off with extra compost, it wasn't that there wasn't like something to start with, but I had lettuce and other things. I made a little bit of like a tent with some used greenhouse plastic and like a little bit of a greenhouse on top for the spring season. And then when summer came, I took that away, and yeah, it didn't take like 1 or 2 or 3 years to really like get growing. Over time, it starts to compact. So like build it twice as high as you would think, because it will compact over time. And then you kind of lose a little bit of that extra growing space. But yeah, it was definitely possible to, if you start in January, until May, it's 5 months. It's like there's a lot of time for stuff to decompose. And there's like some people that think, okay, well, if you add a lot of woody stuff, it might rob the soil of nitrogen, and the composting process kind of like absorbs that instead of giving it, making it available to the plants. So you definitely want to finish it off with some finished compost, so that like, all those plants that have relatively shallow roots still have something to grow. But it's some of the best soil that I have in my garden is where I built those beds. It's like a brownie, like a 1 foot brownie.
Are your neighbors like, what is he doing now?
Yeah.
Well, you know what that means in Jersey, right? You got the mobs and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you could compost, human remains too. It's definitely something that becomes more into fashion. And there's like I think 5 states now where you can actually where human body composting is now legal. It is an option. So
that's in Jersey.
Is it? Yeah, that's everybody's talking about a green funeral now. Like, okay.
Yeah, and I feel like it's I think I want to be composted. To me, it feels like if I'm going to be shipped back in like bags of soil, and then my family can put a little bit under a tree and put a little bit in there, it feels like it feels right to me. It feels like I'm gonna. It's like on a small scale, bacteria and microbes, they have a very short life, and something comes and eats it, and then it goes into something else. My life is a little bit longer, but like on a much more like macro level, our life is also very short, right? Like compared to like millions of years, what is like 80 or some years, right? It's like, it's also kind of, different.
Well, and I mean, the saying is ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So we go back from whence we came, right? I mean,
yeah, and it doesn't matter how much money you made, or like what your job was or whatever. Like after that, you'll go back into the soil. We come from the soil. Yeah. We're being nourished by the soil. It's what sustains us, and I think that's where we'll belong too.
Now, Tim, all compost is not the same. Mm-hmm. So if you went to get a bag of compost at Home Depot, Lowe's, have you ever looked at that compost under a microscope?
No, I haven't. But I also don't buy compost at Home Depot or Lowe's. So
I would love to know the results to see what's actually in compost.
Yeah. That's a good question, and I'm not saying that there isn't any good compost at like a big box store, but generally speaking, try to see if there is an actual like community composter in your area, someone that where you kind of know where the compost comes from or who made it. A lot of like compost in on a grand scale in the big box stores often is just it's a pretty uniform feedstock, because it makes it easier to produce on a larger scale. So it might be dairy manure or something like that, and blend it with, it might have a little bit of the spectrum, but not all of the spectrum. And it depends on what you're getting it for. Are you getting it for the organic matter, the bulk, to get more organic matter in your soil, or are you looking for the microbes?
Now, seed starting, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you use the compost you make, or would you get a seed starting mix to start your seeds?
No, for me, it's like, I'm also lazy and also a little bit ignorant, in terms of like, oh yeah, I could like do this and I could do that, but for me, I'm convinced of, my compost it's like like you can blend compost more with other things to make a soil. You know, like a compost is not a soil. A soil is usually a blend, and compost could be a 30, 40 or something % of that blend, you know. But usually what I do is I'll use the vermicompost, sift it out. What I also sometimes like to do is I like to make an extract and coat my seeds with the extract. So you're essentially going back to the microbiome. You're like giving that seed a whole microbiome. So once that root comes out, it's like right there, you know.
That's
what
great information, guys, in the chat right there. That is awesome information.
Yeah.
Do you test the pH of your compost, or do you pretty much know where it lands so that then you can take it and amend it for different things that you might want to grow?
Yeah. So I mature my compost. You know, it's like I said, like you can make a hot compost in 21 days and it's compost, you know, but I essentially, I give it some time. And like, if you're committed to gardening, then every season counts, right? And it never stops. So essentially you want to plan like a year ahead of time with your compost, ideally. And if you've given that much time, I would almost like bet money on it that the pH is fine if you haven't like let it go waterlogged or something. You know, like if you put it in some sort of container and it's like, you know, gone aerobic, then there might be issues. But I've like measured my pH before and it was pretty much right around 7. The thing is, if you really want to test it, then you can do what we call a bioassay. And that's essentially you plant inside, you plant in the compost and you see if it comes up or not, right? It's like, it's as simple as that. So obviously, yeah. And there is actually something, you know, because you mentioned herbicides. So there is something that I could share about this. I'm connected here with the Ohio Organics Council. You know, I'm a member of the U.S. Composting Council. I just kind of want to mention this. If someone's like really into composting, you want to check out the U.S. Composting Council. And here with the Ohio Organics Council, we, you know Scott's Miracle-Gro, probably you've heard about them. So Scott's, they're actually a company from Ohio, Marysville. And last year we did an event at their R&D facilities, and we had the opportunity to talk to some of the scientists there that conduct experiments, and one of the PhD students has come up with a test to test for persistent herbicides, and she essentially recommends to use garden peas, because they are big seeds, so it's like you can really so she recommended like to use something that has a bigger seed as opposed to like something with a small seed. And garden peas, they make shoots really, like they grow really quickly. So if you wanted to test and see if there's like some sort of persistent herbicide in your compost or in your soil, then you can essentially take that, put it in a little bit of like a greenhouse container, you know, like those little plastic thingies. And within 2 or 3 weeks, you'll have the answer whether or not it's, you know, there is persistent herbicides in there or not. So, yeah.
Oh, cool. So, Tim, I want to show everybody your
Can
website.
you talk a little bit about the, oh,
yeah.
Go ahead. Finish. Finish.
Oh,
Paul.
I wanted to know about the composting conference. That sounds fascinating. Like, what can people, I had no idea there was a whole thing like that. So I think that's amazing. So what could people expect from something like that? And what would make them go attend?
I mean, to really attend the Compost conference, I think you have to be a little bit more than just a gardener. It's not it's an actual conference. You know, it's, I think the if you're a member, it's like $500 some. If you're not a member of the UCC, it's like $700. There are day tickets. So if it's in Daytona Beach in Florida this year. It's always in a different city. Last year we were in California, but there's so much. First of all, there's just 1,000 compost geeks. Okay, like 1,000 people that are all kind of like in some form or shape, soil biology, waste management, you know, equipment. They are all there. So if that's something that you're about, then you just feel like you're in the right space. It's like going to, you know, like a place where there's just a bunch of gardeners, you know, so you feel like you're in the right community. And then there's just a lot of knowledge, right? It's like, it's a little bit of a trade show. So there's like 1.5 days of a trade show floor where there's exhibitors. But for the most part, there's 1 day just with workshops. And then there's like 2 days just jam-packed with presentations. And really, it goes from like compost marketing to soil health to stuff with like climate change and carbon sequestration and that stuff. And I'm specifically looking forward to a workshop this year by Dr. Laura Kavanaugh. So, you know, you can check her out. I've heard her speak last year in August, and what she's doing, she used to work for Syngenta. I don't know if you know Syngenta. It's like a big, it's almost, you know, it's a big fertilizer company, essentially, very, you know, synthetics. And she's been a scientist there for years. And then now she's kind of like switched sides, and she's now really all about the microbiology. So kind of the opposite. And what she does is she uses a DNA sequencer to look into the microbes. And I mean, if you're fascinated with microscopy and looking into the microbiology, that's one thing. But then going into DNA sequencing is really like a whole nother level. And that's like something where I feel like we'll see a lot more in the future. To me, that's like the future of soil microbiology, to try to understand what's going on. So for example, her vermicompost that she had sequenced had 10,000 different species of microbes inside. 10,000. Okay, so if you like, I told you about like a zoo. Have you gone to a zoo that has 10,000 different animals? You know, so it's like we're literally barely scratching the surface of what's really there, and we've been like so ignorant the last like 50, 70 years. In like thinking that we can just like make chemicals that make plants grow, and that's how we feed them, because like we feed them. Tell me, who has been feeding 600-year-old redwoods the last 600 years? Who like who gave them fertilizer? Who brought them pellets? You know, it was really all the microbes all along. So yeah.
So Tim, I got a question before we have two other questions just came on in. Yeah. What do you think about mushroom compost?
I mean, what do I think about it? I guess I don't have like a specific opinion on mushroom compost. Are you talking about a compost that is made that is essentially the leftovers from producing mushrooms?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. It's compost. You know, I guess it also depends on where does it come from. It could also just be more like a bulk kind of compost, because mushroom producers aren't necessarily trying to make the best compost out there. They essentially just have a leftover resource that is still a valuable resource that can then be reused, you know? So I don't think it's necessarily better or worse than any other compost. I guess it's kind of just another compost to me, you know. Yeah.
Terry says, any concerns with manure where the animals have been inoculated somewhere using and for warming pigs and stuff?
Yeah, so, well, you definitely want to be careful with like horse manure when the horses just got like a dewormer, you know, like if you're trying to feed a horse manure to your worms and the horses have been treated with that, then you might be killing your worms for sure. That might be an issue. So if you're I'm all for animal manures. They're great. Like animal manures are potent. They are usually, a lot of people just try to get rid of them so you can get them for free. So if you incorporate them into your garden, it's like, you know, why buy an NPK product off the shelf that's a synthetic when you can go to your Craigslist and find someone that's trying to offload their horse manure, you know, or their pig manure. I guess that is actually good stuff to make a hot compost pile with. So any sort of like animal manure thing that is like, the thing is like with animal manures, if you pick it up somewhere, it's not something that's coming out of your kitchen every day. It's not something where you need to continuously compost, right? But it would be something where it's like you have a project. I want to break ground for a new garden bed this season. I want to like do these 20 feet by whatever feet or these 100 feet. I want to kickstart it. Okay. Then yeah, get yourself that animal manure and get some other carbon source to blend in, or like in like with horse manure, sometimes you get a lot of the straw with it, with the bedding. Sometimes it's just the manure, but essentially blend it and plan to make a hot compost pile. Tend to it for 3 weeks. Get yourself a thermometer, and you're gonna be like, a thermometer is like $20 or something. Get a pitchfork, make that pile. You'll see it's gonna get hot. Check the moisture level. As I said, moisture, water is the grease of the compost engine, and you'll end up with a fantastic stuff amendment that you can put out in your garden beds.
Riverdale Garden says, Tim, I compost just about everything from the kitchen and mix them with leaves. I often throw on paper towels and uncoated paper plates. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's something that there's like another sad thing. We've been talking about contamination, and one thing that I haven't even touched on is PFAS, or also forever chemicals, as some people have known, or have heard about them. And the thing is, once you start getting into PFAS, I had heard about like Teflon pans and, like being kind of like careful with the coating. I never really knew why. And then the more and more I got into composting, and then I had a friend, Nick, he said, hey, have you ever heard about PFAS? I was like, no, what is that? Perfluoroalkyl, it's like a very long, it's essentially fluorinated substances that have different lengths of carbon chains. So they are really good at what they do. They repel water. They can essentially create a slick surface. And as I said, like now that I'm kind of like opening that rabbit hole for you, you should start Googling it.
I already have multiple videos on my page about PFAS. So yeah,
okay. So
done them all. Yeah, it's everywhere. Yeah.
Right. So going back to that question, it's in toilet paper, but in about 30% of all toilet paper, you'll find PFAS, and it's because in the production process, that's what I think. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're adding it because it makes that process smoother, right? It stops the machines from clogging. If you imagine like a huge thing of like cellulosis and whatever, they're adding it as like some sort of like agent, and then you have those water treatment facilities where they end up with the sewage sludge, which people have been like, the EPA has recommended to use that stuff on organic fields, okay? And there's no farmers that put that out for a decade, and they essentially can't farm anymore because the thresholds in their soil are so above everything that that's not really safe. So I used to say, hey, do all your shopping with brown paper bags and just use those paper bags, put them in your worm bin. It's great. It's good carbon, you know. I've gotten a little bit more careful with just any sort of paper product because it's PFAS. It's something I can't even see under a microscope. You know, it's completely invisible, and it's still like a discussion on how bad it is or how, you know, what it does to you. But there's enough evidence out there that shows that it's not good for you. And I don't want to like wait another 10 or 20 years to get solid evidence, you know, or like a scientific consensus. I would be careful with paper stuff, and it's very sad, but it's the reality. So I've stopped putting my paper bags in my compost. I'm putting it in recycling now, and I feel like, okay, it's also fine if they make new paper out of it. But that's the other thing is if you like have recycled paper, you know, which a lot of like you'll get a brown bag and says like 100% recycled paper already, then the PFAS might actually be in there because there's been all that mixing and different types of paper that have been then combined to make a new recycled paper. That's how it could also get into it. So it's a sad reality, but we kind of have to face it. And I'm advocating for wood chips, leaves. Those are my favorite carbon sources now because they're usually still uncontaminated.
So we got a question from Built on a Rock Homestead. Are plants that die because of a hard freeze, are they still considered green?
No, I would. I think at that point, I would consider them brown or a carbonous material. Also, do you know the composition of our air?
I'm sorry, I was looking at a question. Say that again, Tim.
Do you know the composition of our air?
No. Go ahead. I'm trying to think what you're trying to say.
What is air made out of?
I almost feel like this is a trick question, but it's not.
Oxygen?
Yeah.
O2?
Oxygen.
Yeah,
I'm trying to overthink. Yeah, oxygen.
Yeah. Do you know how much oxygen is in our air?
No, I don't. I totally don't know right now. I'd love to see what you're coming from because this is going to get very interesting.
Yeah, so air is about 21% oxygen, 21%. Okay. And then there's about 79% nitrogen is our air. Okay. And then there's like point something 3 or 4. I'm not exactly sure is CO2. And then there's the rest are noble gases. And once you exhale it, the oxygen goes down from 21 to maybe 17% or something. And it comes out with more CO2. But essentially, going back to this question, nitrogen is like volatile. Okay, so it's like if it's still green and fresh and kind of like juicy, the nitrogen is like still bound, right? But like once it all dries off and goes through a hard freeze or whatever, it just goes back into the air.
Okay, makes a lot more sense now. The Wickershire project goes huge concern with some types of manures and heavy metals. Thoughts?
Well, it depends on where the manure comes from, what the animals are eating. So, you know, it really depends on the context. It's you know, like if you plan on using it regularly, have it tested, talk to the animal, to the person that keeps the animals, talk to them about what they're feeding them. And then I guess anybody that has animals and maybe like even plans to eat the animals, you know, pigs, cows, or whatever, chickens, I mean, they should also be concerned about, you know, eating the animals if there's heavy metals in them. I buy organic chicken feed because I'm trying to feed something that is a little maybe like cleaner or not contaminated. But yeah, so it's always, if you're getting any sort of like thing from someone else, talk to them and see what they have to say. And then if you're doing it at a larger scale, like a heavy metal test can be done for about $40, like a soil test or like some sort of like substrate test for absorbed metals. Just go online. All the big universities in different states, they all have like an extension office, a laboratory where you can do these soil tests. And if you think about it, you're really planning on like doing a big project, like, you know, like breaking ground for more garden space. You could easily be out hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for soil or compost, right? So what is really a $40 test to test, you know, a source for something if you can get your hands on it for free and get a lot of it and make compost and make your soil from it, then it's definitely worth to have that peace of mind if you're concerned about heavy metals. And my hometown is 1,100 years old. We had the longest running silver mine in the whole world. Okay, it ran 1,000 years straight. So all around that city is actually a history of you know, like taking that ore and making stuff. And there was like a time where they had the politics of the tall chimneys, right? So like they used to have like short chimneys, and they would see, well, that stuff like kind of like all comes back down on us. So what they did is build taller chimneys. So we'll just go further away, you know. So good kind of thinking. Yeah.
That's your PFAS right there. Your forever chemicals coming out in the air.
Yeah.
Tim, how are we doing time-wise? Do you have to go, or you got a couple more minutes?
No, I'm good. I have some time. I'm all good. We can, you know, if there's more questions, or I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer.
Okay. The Wickershire project goes time, basic carbon to nitrogen percent making compost.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that question.
I'm trying to figure it out myself.
So like if you're looking for a carbon to nitrogen ratio, we're usually looking at like a 30 to 1.
30 to 1. Juby, that's Julianne. She goes, if wanted worms, is it better to do a left and right side feeding bins versus multiple buckets method?
Yeah. So it depends on the buckets. Are we talking about just a single bucket, or are we talking about stacking buckets into each other and having holes in the bottom? If you could clarify that, I'm essentially, the idea really with a left and right side is that you fill up the one side, and once it's full, you start filling up the other side, and the worms will move over to the fresh food. And then this way, they will move out of the finished product, so it's easier to harvest. You know, you won't take the worms out by harvesting the castings, because the worms are now in that other area where you continue to feed them. So if you have buckets that you stack into each other, then you have the same principle. The worms will migrate upwards, and there's a lot of vermicomposters out there that have this principle. So with trays, where you stack the trays. So like once a tray is full, you add another on top, keep feeding, put another on top, keep feeding, and then eventually you can take the one from the bottom that will only have the finished vermicastings in there, and the worms have moved up. The idea here is really to reduce the labor, to have an easy way to harvest the castings. If you just have a bucket without holes and another thing, then the disadvantage is here, you feed from the top and the finished stuff is on the bottom. So to be able to harvest the stuff from the bottom, you have to kind of like take out all that stuff. You have to mess with the worms to get to the castings, and then put that stuff back in your bucket. So it's really just a kind of like a labor thing. If you move the worms, whether being it sideways or up, it's just really about being able to harvest, not disturbing the worms, and keeping that that cycle going.
And Juliana says, do you have a favorite one over the other?
Well, I think my favorite one is really the one that fits your context, right? So like, for example, I have a huge like IBC toad. You know, I cut IBC toads in half, and then it's really just like a big bucket. So in order to harvest it, I really have to deal with the whole thing. And it's just like, you just have to think about it more. You have to prepare it more. For anyone that's just kind of like doing this on a smaller scale, doing any sort of migration is just going to be much easier, because you just don't have to deal with sifting out worms, dealing with the unfinished stuff, or like the stuff that's still visibly food scraps or something. So I would recommend, I definitely recommend either an upward migratory or a sidewards migratory system. It's really more convenient.
Kalen Strain goes, snow fell on my compost bin. Compost in my bin. Is that plus freezing okay for it?
Yeah, it's actually good. So if you have like, if you collect food scraps and you put them in your freezer before you put them in your compost bin, it actually breaks open some of the cell walls. It's almost like it's making it easier for the microbes to attack. So the freeze doesn't really is not bad for the compost. It's just that the compost process itself, it doesn't really work while freezing, right? It's like if you have a big enough pile and on the inside it's not frozen, it'll continue. But in the portions where it's frozen, it's kind of frozen in time until you unthaw it, and then it just continues.
Die Bullfrog 79 goes, what do you think about mechanical composting?
What's mechanical composting?
I guess that's not compost on a farm, but multiple, using your trucks and everything like that, like the stuff that you would see at a store.
Maybe Diable Frog can clarify that a little bit. I guess at a certain scale, you need some sort of mechanics to save your back, right? There's a lot of interesting machines out there, and maybe that's something that I should touch on. There's like in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of these kitchen countertop composters. Have you seen those before?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen any ads for them? I mean, like you should be seeing those all over the place, like the Mill, Lumi, Wrinkle or something. Have you seen those?
A little bit. I haven't really seen too much, but I do research all over the place, but not like in ads all over the place and all that stuff.
It's like I'm being followed around, like wherever I go online. It's like, hey, get like one of these. And there was like a big kind of like thing because they call themselves kitchen countertop composters.
Oh, okay. Yes, I got you.
And so like, because they asked about like mechanical composting, these kitchen countertop composters are really more like dehydrators and grinders machines, because they are the product that comes out of it is not compost yet. Okay, we would like, as composters, we'd call it a digestate. We'd call it something that it's essentially, food scraps are 90% water, so that's a challenge to transport all that stuff. It makes a lot of it's big mass. But if you just dehydrate it and grind it, you reduce the weight and the volume by 90%, then you end up with this like powder, which some of these companies have called compost. And I see them like on Facebook, the people that have these machines saying, oh, I've been using my compost, but it's really, if you take that stuff and put water back on it, it usually starts to mold. And that's like a sign that it's not compost yet. It's really just dehydrated food scraps. However, those can be a good organic fertilizer in conjunction with actual compost, because there's still minerals in it, and they have a place. And we just can't call it compost. We need to be a little bit more clear about what it is. Like some people take that stuff and put it in their like plants at home on top of the soil, and it actually kills the plants because it's not matured. It's like once you rehydrate it, it might become problematic for you. So on the grand scheme of like making compost mainstream, right, in terms of like using this as a tool for waste management, I feel like they have their place, but we need to be a little bit more careful about what we call the output. And yes, you can actually take that stuff and put it in your vermicomposting system, and then you'll end up with a really like microbial product that is good, and that is compost.
So Uncle Al did say the use of machines to compost food and garden wastes.
Yeah. So table biodigestion. Yeah, I guess for the most part, I use table biodigestion. Yeah. There is, I guess, I feel like whatever works for your context, it's like if it works for you, and the thing is, compost is a never-ending thing. You eat every day, you have food scraps every day. So to me, you need to have something that you can keep up with, something that doesn't overwhelm you, something that you can actually just continue to do day in and day out. So if you use like a machine that helps you, that's great.
So I'm going to show everybody your website that you have. 1 second here. I'm going to make sure I have it. Compost marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Tim's website. You also have his email up here. Tell us a little bit about your webpage and everything you have here. Compost marketing options, your work to raise awareness and adoption of more compost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the Compost Marketing Agency is, we're working with composters. We're working with organizations that are in the composting space, with organizations and nonprofits that are doing recycling education. We're working with municipalities. Really, the umbrella is to make compost mainstream and to support all those that have the same goal from our marketing angle. I've been working in marketing pretty much since I was 15, and I have a long marketing background, and I've taken that and translated everything into composting, and I've started to connect the dots, right? Like I said, there's some people that just look at composting as a tool for waste management, and that's their angle. And there's the people that look at it for the soil fertility. I'm trying to bridge it. I'm trying to bring people together. That's what we're doing. It's like we mainly do digital marketing, so we do social media content. We also do marketing consultation. We strategize with compost companies on how to go to market, who to market for. One of our clients is we work with like some compost manufacturers, a big like the vermicompost system manufacturers, Worm Gear. We work with them. So if you're like into larger scale vermicomposting, check out Worm Gear. Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing there. It's probably not, it's not like relevant for like gardeners, but like if you are really a compost educator, if you are a compost maker or soil maker, or if you, we work a lot with compostable products manufacturers, because they want to replace plastic with compostable packaging and products. And there is we're kind of like in the messy in between right now, because we now have compostable packaging and products that now still ends up in the trash because there's no composting available in certain areas. I've seen like, I've done an interview with someone about, coffee stores that now have compostable cups, but they don't have a compost bin in their coffee store, right? So they're trying to do the right thing, but they're not yet there. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on. I'm really working with the Ohio Organics Council and other nonprofits that are behind trying to push legislation. I don't know if you're aware, but there is a thing right now called the Compost Act in the Senate, and it's kind of been stalled right now, but we're really hoping for that. Because the bottleneck to make compost mainstream is composting infrastructure. It takes a lot of time to bring a commercial composting facility online. There's a lot of things that go into it. And even if there's support and money and everything, there might be neighbors that say, not here, and it takes 3 to 5 years to get that online. And that's why I think each and every one at home can make a difference, because if we're composting at home, we don't need a truck to pick it up. We don't need a commercial composting facility to do all that stuff, and then it's sitting there in that commercial facility, and it might be subpar compost, and then what to do with it, right? We at home, we have the opportunity to close that loop. We can stop buying chemical fertilizers for our lawn, and we can essentially turn our leftover food scraps into our lawn fertilizer. We can close that loop, right? Or we can turn it into our produce, that we then harvest and make tomatoes out of, yesterday's banana peels.
But then we'd get dandelions.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Paula, do you have any other questions?
I don't think so. I love this conversation. I appreciate all of your insight. And I just love anytime we can connect human health with soil health. It really is, we are one and the same. So thank you for all your education, and appreciate you being here.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I hope everybody learned a lot in the chat. We've been averaging basically around 35, 40 people in the last hour, and nobody's really moved, which is pretty cool. But I hope everybody learned a lot here. And Tim, thank you so much with all your wisdom and teaching us about compost. And the way I look at it,
thanks for having me.
It all starts with the compost, not the soil.
One way or the other. I probably would still say it starts with the soil, because that's what compost ultimately, like, where it belongs or what it feeds. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit of that stuff, because that's another part of making compost mainstream is to bring it into the public eye, to share it with other people, make them aware. That's a big part of my mission. You shared my LinkedIn. I post about compost every day. I've been posting 660 times or something in the last 2 years. I also have an Instagram that is specific for vermicomposting. It's @wormworkers. So if you're particularly interested in vermicomposting, head over to Instagram and check out Wormworkers. And then feel free to reach out, either through the Wormworkers or through the Compost Marketing Agency. Look into, if you have a state chapter of the USCC in your state, there are 16 states that have, maybe now 17 states that have a chapter. And
what is that chapter for? What?
Of the USCC, the US Composting Council. That's our nationwide, trade association.
Okay.
And here in Ohio specifically, we have the Ohio Organics Council. If there's any people from Ohio here, please check it out. It's ohioorganicscouncil.org. We love to welcome new members. We're like doing events around composting and soil health and all that stuff. You'll be in good community, that's probably the last thing I should mention. I do an international compost mastermind session once a month. It's in my Zoom room. It's like I've been having people there from India, from Mexico, Turkmenistan, Canada, all around the globe. If you want to brainstorm or composting, if you need feedback, encouragement, inspiration, come and join us. The sign-up page is also in my LinkedIn profile.
Perfect. I know I followed your LinkedIn. I just followed you on Instagram. We've dropped all the links here to everything that you've mentioned. And would love to stay connected and learn more from you for sure. I'll be following you for sure. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim. We'll talk. I think you're having a lot of people talk to you very soon.
I think one thing is probably that I don't know if you've mentioned it, but maybe we should all sing happy birthday for you before we log off.
Yes. Are we ready? You guys ready?
Yeah. You can all sing there. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear
Joe
Gardner.
And Birthday Gardner and Grow Big TV.
Happy birthday to you. And many more.
And many more.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for doing it.
All right. Well, bye-bye. Thanks for having me. And I'll talk to you soon. Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care, Tim. That was awesome.
That was great. What a great guy.
That one.
Yeah.
I love it.
He was so nice. Wow. And just, yeah.
The information in little spats. If somebody had a notebook and wrote all that stuff down.
Oh my gosh.
It's a lot.
It's a good thing that the video lives on, right? Somebody go back and re-listen and take notes.
Yeah, somebody take notes right now. Jane Doe, where are you?
Jane, yeah, please. As he was talking about all the different links, I went through and I dropped them in the chat, but I also bookmarked them so I could go back and check those out. So pretty outstanding. Yeah, I'm just imagining him when he said he's in a small urban area, and I'm imagining his neighbors peering out the window, what is he doing now? What is he wants our garbage? What?
if I did with all energy what he with if I was digging up my yard, people definitely think I killed somebody in New Jersey.
I know. Well, I have new neighbors behind me. And so, every day, every other day, I'm walking buckets of things back into the compost pile, right? And I mean, they must just be like, what is she doing? What is she throwing back there? Like I'm burying a dead body or something,
And thank you, Jane, the whole time posting links throughout this whole live. That was outstanding. And I hope you guys really connect to Tim. Every single day he's posting something. I mean, that's important. If it wasn't important, he wouldn't be posting it. The man is 24/7 compost. Mm-hmm. And so hit those links. Check it out. Compost is our soil. We only have 1 inch left of our soil. Everything's depleted from salt, from fertilizer, and from a lot of crap, if you want me to say it. We got to build up our soil, because without our soil and our water, our ocean, there is no life. Mm-hmm. Life just dies. So by putting all that compost and making compost, we really need to make it mainstream. And the more you do
Well, I mean,
that,
think about. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I didn't know where that even came from.
I'm getting his. I'm getting his Instagram link because a couple of people were asking there, so I'm just grabbing the Instagram link here, so I can drop this in the chat here too. So here we go. Okay.
Awesome.
There we go.
Yeah, just with this, it's so important to compost.
There you
And
go.
'cause
Okay, that's his Instagram link.
not many people have used compost in the last, maybe out west, but not out over here. Everything's go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's, go to Ace Hardware, get your soil. Everybody's using peat. That's it. Peat.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is it's difficult when you're like, oh, do it this way, don't do it that way. There's all this conflicting information. It's oh, you're doing it wrong. No, like, don't make it so complicated. We're taking food and turning it into dirt. It actually doesn't seem like it should be that difficult to me, to get food, to get organic matter to break down into more organic matter. It doesn't seem like that difficult. But
and autoimmune diseases, you see it in your practice all the time. It's all because of the soil.
Yeah,
that's the way I
it's
look at
crazy.
this.
Yeah, just so many chemicals in our soils. And that was a great question. I was when I forgot who posted that about the paper. I think it was Jujubee. Was it? No, who posted about the paper towels and the paper plates? And I was waiting. If he didn't have an answer, I was going to jump in with the PFAS. I'm like, that's a no. Let's, not do that. But, and I think to his point is there's always going to be some level of contamination. And if we can just do our best, I think that's really important to understand, is that because we live in such a highly toxic world, it's not going to be perfect, but, we just do our best. And, we can't obsess over it. We can just make it a little bit better each time.
Well, it's life in a city too, right? Think of all life in a city. I mean, there's nobody has space, nobody has anything. Everything's brought on, and who knows where some compost goes these days?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of problems. 1 second, Nancy. Welcome in, Nancy. Nancy Moore goes, I am sorry. Please write down an Instagram
I'm
address.
getting it.
I don't understand.
I'm getting it. Yeah. It's worm workers. So go to search and type in worm workers, all one word. There. How's that? Try it that way.
That is one thing I got to get into. I'm in all social media except for Instagram. I got to start getting into that one.
I think it's really easy to miss some of the pages. Like right now, I'm like, I got to get back into LinkedIn. So I've been a lot more active on LinkedIn and Insta, and just trying to go out across all the channels. But there's only so much you can do, right? So that was great. It reminds me too of when I was trying to grow mushrooms at one point, and I studied mushrooms up one side and down the next. I bought books on mushrooms. I went to workshops on mushrooms, and I planted them, and we did drill and fill, like we did all the different ways. And so I had them in multiple areas outside, in different areas in my garden, and nothing grew. And then somebody accidentally dumped 30 yards of mulch in my driveway. I was like, where'd this come from? So I figured out who it was. We got them to come and pick it up. And well, long story short, after about 4 days to a week sitting in my driveway, mushrooms are growing in this mulch. And I was like, and then I called the company, and they said, oh, you must have done something wrong. I go, it's fungus. Okay. Like fungus grows randomly everywhere. And I go, I said, I don't think I think their inoculants were bad, because there was no way. It's fungus. It should grow. So I feel that way about composting, is that it shouldn't be that difficult to be able to take organic matter and break it down into more organic matter. So just starting somewhere.
It should be nice and easy for you. Nice and easy.
Do you do compost? Do you compost?
Did I compost?
Do you compost? Yeah.
A little bit, but I got to do a lot more of it. I've been adding leaves. I've been adding stuff to the soil, but I got to compost like I should be composting.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I mean,
got
I've got leaves, all kinds of stuff. I'm just, again, I'm not doing it right.
I have my neighbor. My number thing, I have to put a fence up. After I get a fence up, I'm set. I am so set. I have leased my neighbor's property. They just moved, by the way. They've been put in there for about 15 years. I have 15 years of leaves
Oh,
stockpiled. That
wow.
bottom has to be so. My soil's okay. You know, it's a sandy kind of mix.
Yeah.
If I add all those leaves,
Got to be gold.
I got gold. And my
Oh.
brother goes to me today. He goes, "Hey, what do I do with all? I have so many leaves. What do I do?" I go, "Don't touch them. I got them.
I'll take them.
You
Yeah.
keep on stockpiling. It's all good."
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it takes usually a year to decompose if you stockpile, or a year, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah.
So,
I know. And I just don't go out and, you know, if I weren't so lazy, I shouldn't call myself lazy. I just have a million other things to do. So I just don't go out and turn it. You know, if I turned it, if I, you know, did what I was supposed to do, I would, you know, but after about 2 years of same thing, couple years, and I can pull from the bottom of that. And I've got some pretty good soil down there.
So we've been here for 2 hours. Right now, I'm going to play a film. And if you want to stay here, we watching it the whole time, feel free to watch it. It is called The Need to Grow. And,
How long is it?
It's called The Need to Grow. I got it on my email. There's only 4 days to watch it before it goes out. And if you guys want to check it out, come and watch with me. I just want to say thank you guys for all your birthday wishes if you guys are going to leave. But I'll be here in the chat watching. And Kaylin goes, "Joe, you better do more composting."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I got a great situation. I just need the fence. Then I'm good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm good to go. And wait till you see the stuff I'm going to plant in my neighbor's property. I don't even know it.
That's great. I'm going to probably jump off. I still have to clean up from dinner and get myself ready for bed, but I'll probably just be watching from bed. And so I'll jump back in and I'll just be here sharing that video with you.
But guys, check out some of this video. Stay for as long as you want. I don't think I could get in trouble with that, could I? I sent the link. It's used 4 days.
Oh, yeah. I don't think so.
They said I'm just showing my community.
There you go. There you go. I love it. And yeah. And where did you get it from?
Email. I got an email. I forgot what place, but we'll notice in a couple seconds.
Yeah. Okay.
This is not the 6 inches of soil. This is something totally different.
Okay.
But the reviews on this is supposed to be really awesome. So I hope you guys go watch it. This is good entertainment. Go grab a coffee. Go grab a soda. Go grab some chips. Actually, better don't do any of that. Get some water. Get some water.
Grab some celery and some water. No chips before bed.
Watch out for the hot peppers. You know, got to be careful of those too. Anyway,
I'm
this
going
is
to say thank you to you, Joe. It's been an honor to come on here and share your birthday with you. So I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate everybody in the chat. It's been great hanging out with you guys. So we'll see you guys very, very soon. I've got Chiropractic is Sexy tomorrow at 1:00 over on my channel. So make sure you jump on in. Would love to see you guys over there. So thanks so much, and have an amazing rest of your birthday week, Joe.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Right.
Paul.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Okay, guys, you're going to want to watch some of this. If you get bored, well, leave. Anyway, I just think it's important to show, what's going on in the world. And you're not going to get this anywhere. So watch some of this tape. Thank you guys for the birthday wishes. Hope you guys liked this live. If you missed it, just go on back and watch it. But let me show you guys this out. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to watch it. The Need to Grow. Thank you, everyone. And I'll be here looking in the chat, looking at my phone and watching this. So here we go.
things grow at exponential rates. They're not linear. And if